Okay, we're back with Ken and Mike for My Uncle's Escaped Alcatraz, and today we're going to go over a variety of subjects. But first up, what we're going to talk a little bit about is our guests from last week because it was great. We loved him, and we loved him so much we used him on our other podcast for our other case, which he actually is following as well. Stewart Fillmore, retired FBI. So wanted to just ask both of you guys, what did you, I mean, you know Stewart, you've worked with him before on one of the documentaries. What did you think about his take on everything as far as the information we have? And I really like the fact that he really reinforced what we thought as far as the files and getting, he doesn't think it's stupid that they haven't released the unredacted files. He thinks that everything should be transparent at this point. So just overall, Cal, start off with you. What was your overall impression with his thoughts about what we've been talking about and what you guys have been investigating for years now, and the contents of your book? So what did you think?
I would have to say I love the contrast between him and Art. Art was the U.S. Marshal that didn't believe that they made it, and then you have Stewart from the FBI, standpoint, that after looking at all of the evidence in the files and what we bring to bear in the book, he actually believes that they made it. So I love that contrast because, that's all we're trying to do is just point out the things that are in the FBI files. And I don't know how anybody else can draw any other conclusion when you just simply look at the facts.
Yeah.
So I love how Stewart backs up what we said.
Me too. Because when I first read the book and I first looked at everything, I was like, how could anyone not believe this? There's just too much. There's too much evidence. And then all the stuff that we found out in Brazil. I mean, I can understand people being skeptical, but after looking at everything and laying it all out, I just don't see how you don't understand that they escaped.
I agree.
Yeah. How about you, Mike?
Well, the thing that I appreciate what Stewart did, now he did say that it was never his case. He never really did anything when he was with the FBI. So he doesn't have a personal connection. It's more of a love of history, a love of solving mystery. And this, he's looked at the case before, Alcatraz. I mean, it would be quite understandable. He'd be interested in this, of what actually happened. But I like the fact that he was very objective about his approach to the story. He wasn't sort of linking arms with the FBI saying, I got to carry on the basic idea that they drown because, stay with the agency. Otherwise, I'll look bad, or I'll make them look bad if I'm sort of calling out mistakes that they made, or there were some omissions in the story from their point of view. And he's looked at it, and he looked at the evidence objectively. It's like a court case. You have this evidence, you have all these documents, you have these eyewitness accounts, these photographs, FBI report, of course, and you look at this and you draw a conclusion. And based on the evidence that is presented, he said, yeah, I am very sure, or fairly certain, that they did make it based on the evidence that we presented, and differing with the account of the FBI. So, like I said, I appreciate the fact that he didn't bring in a prejudice. He didn't bring in a predisposition of ideas. It's like, this is what this says. This is the only conclusion I can draw.
Yeah, I think he's been out of the FBI long enough to kind of have some distance too. And, unlike Art, who seems like he has one toe still left in there. It just seems like, even though he's been retired for a while now, I think you never know how often they kind of bring him back in on things or consult with him, or a lot of times they, contract people. I mean, we have a lot of friends who are retired FBI agents who continue to do work for the agency as contractors overseas. And that's how they do it sometimes. But I like the fact that, like you said, Mike, he has a fresh approach to it, an objective approach. He's not stating the party line for the FBI and the FBI files, and kind of reveals that some of the bureaucratic systems that have been in place in regards to not unsealing the records and unredacted files at this point, almost on the 100-year mark of their birthdays, is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, and something else too. I mean, he's not the first FBI agent that has given support to the successful escape of the three men. I mean, there were two special agents that was reported in the newspaper when they interviewed Officer Chechi that said that when he described the boat, they said, yes, that backed up their theory that there was a boat involved. And so there were two there that believed that a boat was involved, and they utilized that boat as a means of getting away. And then you had a letter that was written to J. Edgar Hoover, which I was able to get through the Freedom of Information Act. And it turned out to be a special agent who was retired, but he wrote to J. Edgar Hoover, and he told him, he said, this is, I believe they made it, and this is how they did it. And he even described someone that had helped them on the inside that had recently been either paroled or left the prison, had to have a means of a boat waiting for them. So, there were a lot of agents that believed that they successfully made it. And I'm talking about field agents. But for some reason, the higher ups in the FBI wanted to kill it. They wanted nothing to do with that, because undoubtedly that's, they pushed that they drowned, and that's how they wanted to close the case.
I think we're, the funny thing is that kind of groupthink in a bureaucratic system like that really hasn't changed, has it? We've seen it just recently, both with the current state of affairs of the FBI. They've been under, congressional testimonies, and you hear, and we know, because we have friends who are retired and who are rank and file, who weren't like in the upper management stuff, that, they didn't have a whole lot of great things to say about the upper echelon. And, not only them, but, recently with the Secret Service dealing with all the stuff that happened in the last few weeks with the Trump assassination attempt, that, you got a lot of Secret Service and government employee whistleblowers saying, hey, listen, it's not us, it's the management. It's the upper management that's kind of throwing all this stuff out.
I mean, isn't that how it is though in corporations or whatever? The upper management has its own little narrative, and if you go against the narrative, they don't really want you to talk about that.
Yes. I mean, even as you read some of the FBI documents that these special agents document and record, I mean, they talk about how clever these men were. I mean, they go into, the detailed planning that they did. And I mean, you just can't go in, and they were very awestruck at how the ingenuity that they came up with by creating these tools that they needed. So, I mean, I think it really impressed some of these agents just how skilled these men were. And so you get down to the water, in this escape. And as just like Stewart said, these men did not do all that they did, all this planning to get down to the water and go, okay, now what are we going to do? I guess we're going to swim for it. I mean, come on. You can't really honestly believe that that's what happened.
Yeah.
No, that's ridiculous. It was too meticulous. They were meticulous people, and they were very smart. So why would they go through all of that and risk getting thrown right back into the cell they broke out of? Makes no sense.
Well, it's kind of like what I've always said, in a normal prison, you're going to escape, you've got that big, huge wall that you've got to deal with when you get there. You don't wait till you get to the wall and go, okay, now what am I going to do? Well, the ocean or the bay was the wall. That was the wall.
Yeah.
And you didn't wait till you get there and go, okay, now we need to come up with a plan. So they already had that plan in place. And the plan that they put in place was what we revealed in the book.
Well, the other thing that Stewart brought up was, in most cases, when people escape from prison, their undoing comes after they get over that wall, because now they need help. They need resources. They need money. They need clothes. They need food. They need a safe house, somewhere to hide. And that's usually what does them in, because they're going to reach out to family and friends to try to provide that. And of course, the authorities know that. So the first people they're going to go to are those people, the connections that they have. And through those means, or if they can't, then they're going to try to rob a store to get money or get clothes or food or something. And then they know exactly where they are, and they just, come in and get them. They don't usually last less than a week before they capture them. Whereas, as Ken talked about with the FBI report, it talked about the planning after the escape, because they talked, John had talked to a number of inmates about their plan after they got off the island. They were going to go to Angel Island as a possibility. They're going to go to San Francisco as a possibility. Of course, we've talked about the boat a number of times, to pick them up. So it wasn't just, we're going to get to the water and swim for it and hope for the best. It was, they were already, as they've had conversations, already thinking about and planning after they got out what they were going to do next.
Yeah, I think that's crucial. And I think what was key is the fact that they really didn't include any of the family members in this. They didn't, I mean, they knew what some family members knew, like, Uncle Man knew, Robert, and Alfred knew, but none of the other extended family knew. So they knew that even if they went and questioned them, they were in the dark. They couldn't tell them anything. And I think that was probably their successful thing to do for them. Obviously it was, because that's, like you said, normally like when they used to escape when they were younger, they always got caught because they always went home.
They always went home.
They always went home. They just wanted to be with their family. And
well, we always thought and believed that Uncle Man was the only one that was involved in this. But from his own mouth to Frank Ahern, or how did you say his last name?
Ahern.
And when you read the interview, there was another relative out in Alcatraz, or out in the San Francisco area. So there was a sister there, yes, with her husband who did aid in part of the escape. But how they kept it, and we never knew this for years, and how they kept that a secret, I have no clue. Because we always thought it was just Uncle Man and that was it, until we read and listened to him talk about there was somebody else involved.
I'm still just mystified that you only got into this story until like later in your life. And just, I know that to me is just amazing. I mean, like obviously you knew about it, correct? Mm-hmm. And, but was it like until you started probing and started asking questions, did you really didn't know everything that they were telling you, like your mom? I mean, how much did your mom really tell you growing up about it? Was it something that the family didn't really want to talk about it because it was kind of like a black page, and according to them? Because to me, it's just like, I mean, now you look at it, it's like, it's
famous. So.
It's famous. It's one of the most craziest escapes ever. Like I said,
but
you can't.
Was it scary for them that they were under surveillance and maybe they didn't want to talk about it because they had the FBI watching them? And I mean, I know my grandparents, they never talked about anything. That generation never spoke.
Yeah. Uncle Man had mentioned multiple times. He was, him and his wife, Billy, at the time, Aunt Billy, was living with my grandparents. And they were in the house when the FBI, they didn't knock. They just opened the door and came in. They had seen them, according to him, setting out in a car. I think there were like multiple cars out in the road, and they just came in. And I remember Uncle Man saying he got up and he was about to walk out, and one of them grabbed him and pushed him back onto the couch and said, "No one is going anywhere until you answer all of our questions." And he told them, he said, my brothers escaped from Alcatraz. I didn't. None of us did. Why are you treating this way? And, they pretty much from that point on, they started questioning every single family member, threatening them with jail time. So you got to think, back in the 60s, these people didn't have any money to defend themselves. You have a guy walk in your house with a badge and a gun and tell you, if we find out in any way, shape, form that you had any knowledge of it, if you knew where they were at and you withheld that information, you're going to prison. They probably were scared half to death.
Oh my God!
I would be.
If it happens
half to death that the IRS is going to come.
Exactly. I mean, if that happened today, we'd be scared.
The FBI.
Yeah.
So, oh my gosh. I can understand how they kept it very close to themselves. And with Uncle Man being the very first person to be interrogated by the FBI, he probably right then said, if anybody in this family is going to ever go to jail, it'll be me. And they all have to pry it out of my dead hands. That's my interpretation of it.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate, based upon
And so
everything.
he kept everyone shielded from it. So, as we grew up, I mean, there were times where I didn't believe that they made it. I mean, I used to think back and go, well, if they made it, how come we have never heard from them, or how come they didn't make contact with the family? I mean, as a young, kid. So there were times I didn't really kind of believe it myself until, much later in life, I really said, I really want to dig into this. I want to really know what happened. And, as I dug and now with Mike's help, I mean, I've uncovered stuff I didn't even know about.
Yeah. Yeah. Mike, what was the craziest thing that you uncovered in your research? What was like your aha moment? Is there one piece of information that you found that you're like, made you think, all right, now we got something here. Now we have something other than just, the photographic proof of them being there, going down deep in your research?
Well, for me, the story lives and dies with the boat. That to me is one of the most important pieces of information that we bring to the story. Because if you look at documentaries, other books, stories about the escape, they always center on the tides and how strong the tides were in the bay, that the time they escaped, they were starting to go out to the Golden Gate Bridge. They couldn't have overpowered the tides. And most likely they didn't make it because of that. Or if their raft disintegrated and they're trying to swim for it again, the tides would have gotten them. But we have so many different pieces of information. Somehow we were able to document what happened. In the FBI report, Ken mentioned that letter about the agent saying there was a boat, there was a guy in the prison that aided them getting the boat, that had gotten out, that had the means to do it. We have the Fred Breezy account that says there was a boat, and then they used to, as kids, he connected it to when we were kids. We used to tie the ropes to the boats and being pulled down the river. Of course, you have the Robert Chechi seeing the boat, and it all comes together perfectly. It's all intersecting. The evidence we have doesn't go off into different directions, and it's hard to reconcile them. They all keep intersecting back to the boat in the bay, because if without that boat, they wouldn't have made it. I don't think. I think the tides would have gotten them, or the cold water, or they would have, made it to Angel Island or to San Francisco and got picked up at some point. But the fact that they had the boat, and Robert Chechi saw it going toward the Golden Gate Bridge, and then later most likely went down to Half Moon Bay, not far away, where there was an airport that Fred Breezy picked him up and flew him down to Mexico. Again, it perfectly corroborates the information that we have from independent sources that have no knowledge of each other. The FBI agent, Chechi, and Fred Breezy have no knowledge of each other, and they're all saying the exact same thing. Well, I have a background in history. I graduated with a degree in history. And the standard for historical events taking place is if you have two independent sources of information describing the exact same thing, historians will treat that historical event as valid and true. Well, we have three. So that to me is it flies in the face of everyone else's theory about, how they possibly got away, either swimming or trying to, paddle their way to freedom, and most likely not being able to do it. And our story is that wasn't even a consideration. They didn't have to worry about it because they're going for the boat. Oh, and the other thing I forgot to include is the extension cord that was left behind. They accidentally left the extension cord behind. That was make or break. If without that extension cord, they wouldn't have been able to execute their plan. And then on the dock where they connected with the boat, an extension cord was reported missing, 125 foot was reported missing the next morning. So again, it goes exactly to what happened with the boat, that they needed it to get pulled into the bay to rendezvous with the boat that Cohen had set up for him. So that to me is the foundation of the whole story. Without that, I don't think it holds up.
And I'd like to add, the one piece to add on to what Mike is saying is that the one piece that really turned for me this whole complete case around was when I found out that Mickey Cohen was involved. You know, and Art, if you notice, he never argued that it wasn't him. In fact, he even supported that it was him that was mentioned in that FBI document. So, you know, here Uncle Man is coming to Alfred and is telling him about Mickey Cohen. Like, okay, how does he know Mickey Cohen? And then how does Mickey Cohen play into this? Well, it is like Mike said, it intersects with other testimony. You've got this agent, special agent, who is talking about someone that probably left the island and took the information with them. That's Mickey Cohen. That actually physically happened. You know, you've got the Supreme Court justice. There's the one that allows him to leave. And then he comes back. And right after he comes back, the escape occurs. And Uncle Man even tells Alfred that there was a boat involved in this escape. You know, Mickey Cohen supplied a boat for them, financed it for them. So this boat, I agree with Mike, this boat is so key. But that finding out about Mickey Cohen to me was what was like that missing puzzle piece that started putting everything to kind of get together. You know, why did the brothers go to California? No one ever knew why. It was because they went to see Mickey Cohen. You know, I mean, why would they come back with all this cash? Why would they come back with a car from California? I mean, why all of a sudden did they start dressing like, you know, at that time in the 50s, like almost like this gangster type look, you know, with patent leather shoes and nice coats and ties. And I mean, before they left to go to California, they didn't dress that way. And then they came
I
back
saw
and
those photographs. It was jeans and t-shirts.
Yeah, jeans and t-shirts. And then they come back and they're wearing suits. So, you know, all of this really kind of starts making sense when you really think about who was involved. And then again, you go back to why is Uncle Man the only person in the family that the FBI and the U.S. Marshals ever polygraphed? Well, they had this FBI document, which they knew that Uncle Man came to Alfred and told him about this. So, you know, of course, we didn't find out about it until much later, you know, when they were released. But that's the reason why they focused in on him. They already knew it was him all this time. So
I'd be interested if somewhere in those FBI files, because this wasn't, you know, Mickey Cohen at this time. I mean, the FBI had been heavily surveillancing him before this whole thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's documents where they have him under surveillance where your uncles were with him at some point, or Fred Breezy. I mean, because they were looking at him for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
it's very possible there's a document out there that describes, like you said, people that were around him that were from Florida. So, you know, either I don't know whenever he got out if he personally himself went to Ruskin and met with Uncle Man, or whether or not he had an associate. You know, I mean, he had other people that had the ability to do it, but just so many strange things, like, you know, Clarence, before Mickey Cohen ever left, asked his family to send him a picture of their house, of the house.
Yeah,
like they've only been gone for a few years. You know, this family didn't have money to do alterations to the house every year, so it was the exact same house. And that particular picture of the house is not in the collection of photos that was described in the FBI inventory. So undoubtedly that photo was missing. Someone took it off the island, because I can promise you, if they asked their parents for a photo of the house, they got to the very next level.
Sure. That's interesting. That's interesting. They never found that photo. They found other photos.
They found all other kind of photos, and I got the descriptions of them, but that house is not part of those photos.
Yeah. And I thought that was also interesting thing that Stewart said. Why wouldn't they release those articles back to the family at this point?
I still believe there's something in one of those letters they do not want us to see. You know, if Uncle Man did relay information to them in some way about, hey, you know, somebody came to the house or whatever, it would definitely be something they would not want us to know. I mean, I just cannot imagine why they would not give us letters and photos back to the family.
Although I thought it was interesting that Stewart had made a comment about that I'd never considered before. Because I know Ken has tried multiple times through the Freedom of Information, and he's talked to governors and senators from his state to look into it, and they have looked into it, and they just keep hitting a brick wall with the FBI and marshals as far as where these records are, and they don't seem to exist for some. So either they're lying and they really have the records and they say they don't, or they've been misplaced, they're gone. But Stewart said it's possible that some of the agents took them as souvenirs.
Yes,
which I never even considered before. I never thought, wow, that's interesting.
Yep. Well, the reason why I say that I know they existed and up until 2012 was because when we went out to meet or to do the 50th anniversary on the island, I told you that, and I have a photo. One of the meetings that we did, we were in contact with U.S. Marshal Dykes at the time. And it's funny. It's another funny story behind us not wanting to meet him in the hotel. We agreed to meet him at the McDonald's. We were staying at the wharf, and we agreed to meet him at the McDonald's. There's the only one down there, and so I have a photo of us in there. But when he's in there, we're talking to him. This is the first time we ever learned of this. He said, "I want to show good faith to the family," and he pulls out a Xerox copy of the last letter that my grandmother wrote Clarence. We never even knew it existed. She wrote the letter on June the 11th, 1962, the day of the escape. And she mailed it, and it was postmarked at 8:00 that night in Tampa. So he had photo scanned the envelope that it came in or was sent in, and then the letter. It's like a 2-page letter. So my question was, and I never thought about it, asking him then, like, well, if you didn't know where all these letters were, how did you get this one? Because if it was mailed on June the 11th, I can promise you it didn't show up fast enough for them to take it. It was probably came a few weeks later, or at least a week later back then. So at least that letter exists, and they refused to even give us that photo. We have a photocopy of it. A Xerox copy. So if he was able to Xerox copy that letter, I can promise you he has access to the other letters.
Yeah.
Or at one time.
But like Mike said, I think what Stewart brought up, the fact that it's in someone's library at home in their den in a frame, I mean, I've had
my old boss took the Lost in Space
robot
one time.
Oh, no.
He stole it off the set when they were.
He had to give it back, but he took it.
But I don't understand. There's a lot of other items they could have taken. I don't understand why the letters or photos. Like, why would you want a photo of me as a young kid?
That doesn't make sense.
It makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, just give them back to the family.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. I'm curious. I mean, we were going to try to get your mom on here, but I mean, obviously you've had probably some long conversations with her about this.
Yes.
So I would, and it's funny because every time, before my mother died, as she was actually dying, we were having, it's like 4 months. So I spent the last 4 months with her. So every night we would have these conversations about her family history. It just started because that generation really didn't really talk a lot about their families for whatever reason. Not like everybody does today. They weren't very open, and his past was the past. And I'm just curious, what were some of the conversations that you had with your mom about all this? Because obviously at that, you were, especially during the writing of the book and doing the research, I'm sure as it was happening, and you were asking her questions, things were coming up that she probably didn't even realize she remembered.
Yeah, I really collected a lot of these stories over multiple years. Stories that I remember Uncle Man telling whenever he would come visit, or we were down in Ruskin at some family gathering. my aunts or my uncles would, like I said, most of the time conversations would come up about John and Clarence and Alfred, and we're sitting around having dinner or whatever, and someone would bring up some story that happened, and and as I was growing up, I would ask my mom about stories of John and Clarence, and she would bring them up too. Like we could be talking about something off the cuff, and she would bring up something about, oh, I remember, your Uncle John, he would do. She used to call him JW. That was short for her. She always said JW, but she would tell stories about, oh, when I was a kid, JW and Clarence would do this, or she told me the story about how one of her brothers, Carson, cut her hair, and how their dad got, whipped both of them. And we even have this kind of in the book as a little side story. But I mean, she would tell a lot of the different stories. But as she's gotten older, her mind is really kind of not there too much anymore. And she has a hard time remembering things. And but as I was writing the book, I would reach out to her and say, hey, Mom, remind me of that story again that you told me. And she could remember for the most part, most of it. But I had to really kind of rely upon my remembrance of not just her, but other members of the family telling this pretty much the same story.
Yeah.
And I also reached out to one of my cousins, who he was actually in the car with my Aunt Verna, his mom, whenever they picked Clarence up at the phone booth in Bradenton, Florida, when he was on the run. He had just broken out of a state prison. And he's the one who told me that story. And I was like, gosh, didn't even realize that. And I actually have him in a photo with John and Alfred, one of those photos where John's sitting in front of the car and he's all dressed up. Well, there are multiple photos that they took that day. And one is with my cousin with them. He was old enough to kind of remember them a lot. So.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So a lot of stories that I just remember hearing, some didn't make sense until, like I said, then I started, Mickey Cohen really kind of was like a missing puzzle piece in my mind, because I remember them going to, California. I never really kind of knew why. And I remember my mom talking about all this money they had when they got back. And it was just like, once I picked up Mickey Cohen, it was like all these other little events just started clicking in my head and in coming back to my memories of stories about their travels and their adventures. So,
does Fred Breezy have any extended family alive?
No, he has his ex-wife, Judy. And her two sons pretty much try to forget Fred. Anytime I've ever spoken to her, she's sent me every single thing that Fred had left at their house, all the photos. So I have those in my possession. And they pretty much, when they separated and went their own ways, they didn't have a whole lot of communication. Now, Fred did have two sisters, and my understanding from Judy, because I was going to reach out to Evelyn, but they're all dead. His mom and his father are dead. His sisters are dead, and he's dead.
Wow.
Yeah. The only thing we have are
those recordings.
The recordings and the Inside Edition interview that he did, which is right after he met the England family in '92. So I do have that, and I meant to share that with you. By the way, I will send it to you.
Okay, cool. Yeah. That's cool. And then one of the other things we wanted to talk about is just some of the when you look at these personal effects and when you're going through all this stuff. I mean, because like I said, I was always interested in my family's history. Even as an 8-year-old kid, I would always find these boxes of old pictures and passports of people I had no idea who they were, but I look at them, they have the same last name as me, or whatever, and you start going back and then that prompts the questions to your family, saying, who is this person? Where were they? Well, who were they? An uncle, an aunt, and what did they do? And where are they from? Why are they this picture, or that kind of thing, So I would imagine that journey when you're doing there. I mean, emotionally, how was this process for you?
Well, gosh, it really kind of opened up another view of my uncles. I had this one set of images of them in my head. And, because like I said, I'd heard their names, I've heard some of the story. I never physically met them other than Alfred. And digging through all of this kind of brought up a new vision of them for me. And it was really kind of the same vision that I wanted other people that had never even heard of them to get and see. That, they were very intelligent men. They were, devoted to their other siblings, to their mom and their dad. They had girlfriends. They were just really good people. Did they have, tendencies to want to rob a bank and earn money? Of course, but they were really not bad people, and that's what I really hope people take away from this book.
When Ken and I were first starting to work on the book, of course, we're talking about all the different things we're going to include and collect all of our evidence and dig for more. So when I wrote the first chapter and I sent it to Ken and I said, what do you think of this? And it starts off obviously with the escape, just the way the book is now. But the first half of the chapter wasn't part of the original chapter 1. It was the second half of the chapter is where the book starts. It's kind of more of a objective, analytical, sort of non-emotional, non-connected kind of a recounting of what happened, just sort of like A, B, C, D kind of a thing of what they did and what the important facts were for the escape. And then, of course, later, recounting and Ken looked at it and he sent it back. He goes, that's not what I want for the book. He wanted to humanize them. He wanted to make them real. He wanted to make whoever read the book feel like you're hanging out with them as their friend and get to know them and what their thoughts and feelings and hopes and dreams were. And he basically wanted to humanize them, not to make excuses, not to kind of sweep it under the carpet of, well, yeah, they were bad people, but there was a reason for it. It was like, no, they made some bad choices, and they were criminals. There's just no getting around that. We wanted to be honest about it, but they had reasons for what they did, and they had plans for their lives, and they wanted a better life. That we talked about that many times, about how poor they grew up. And so that Ken's desire to really introduce his uncles to the world and that the uncles that he knew and learned about, that was his goal for the book. And so that shaped the rest of the chapters after that. And then we really brought in a lot of the stories and a lot of the incidences and the conversations and the memories of who they were that the family knew growing up.
That's what I love about the book, because it's the human condition. Like, we're all complex people. Humans are complex, and these guys were complex.
Right.
They weren't just criminals. It wasn't black and white.
They weren't born that way.
No,
that's the origin story.
They
I think
are
is so important.
human, and you guys did a great job at humanizing them and really making me feel compassion for them.
Yeah. And I almost kind of feel like that if I had not stepped up and did this, after me, I mean, the story probably would never have been told. People there would have been no one else around that would have heard these stories and could have brought it to bear. So, I'm just glad that I was able to meet Mike and we were able to do this together, because it would have been a lost story in history if we had not done it now.
Who would have had the access that you had?
Nobody.
Who would have all that?
But the passion too. I mean, you're so passionate about the story, which I think is what also brings it to life.
Yes. Yes.
I
definitely want people to know what actually happened, not not the Clint Eastwood version of it. Although I love the movie,
We love Clint Eastwood. Nothing
but
against him.
that's not what happened.
That's not what
Exactly.
happened.
Exactly. I think that's, if anybody gets anything out of this, if you read the book,
And you
And
need to
even-
read the book.
and if you haven't seen the Clint Eastwood movie, watch the Clint Eastwood movie,
Mhm.
read the book, and you'll say, "Oh, that's what happened."
Mhm.
I mean, the movie's a movie, and they take a lot of poetic license on that, and then that movie, they borrowed scenes from that movies from a couple other prison escapes too. I mean, it's like you see it kind of, everyone's borrowing for anything, but originally it was Clarence and John, and it was their story, it was their ingenuity, it was their ability to kind of figure this out and problem solve things that that not many people could do. I mean, prison escapes, it's just like,
It sounds like a movie. Like you can't believe it.
Right.
Like when you're reading it, you're like, how do these guys do this? But I think that's what was so interesting for me, because all I knew was obviously the Alcatraz movie with Clint Eastwood, to learn about them and who they are.
I did an interview with a lady Monday, I believe it was Monday, yesterday, from an independent newspaper out of the UK, and she read the book, and I was, because I really wanted to know, okay, you read the book for the first time, what was your thoughts on it? And, she loved the fact that she called up, she was able to pull out how intelligent these people were, John and Clarence and Frank Morris were. She did recognize that it was really a love story, we woven into the story between John and Helen. But she also picked up, she said, I'd never really thought of the connection, between the JFK part and all of these characters that are in this book. And I said, well, we didn't intentionally try to come out and say anything as far as, hey, we believe in this conspiracy theory or this theory or whatever. We just really wanted to lay it out and let people make their own mind up, And she thought it was one of the best books she's ever read.
I agree with her. It's it's a beautifully written book, and you guys did an amazing job on it, and everyone should read it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I also want to share one other story I was just thinking about, again to humanize the story. We've talked a lot about Uncle Man, Ken's Uncle Robert, and how he was the one that was sort of the connector between Cohen and the brothers and Alfred, and Fred Breezy, of course. And he had a tremendous, he had a burden to carry, but he also had, his commitment to keeping the family safe from the authorities. And we've talked about it many times from sort of different perspectives, but one of the things we bring out in the book was it was also a tremendous burden for him, because he would visit his brothers from time to time with Fred's help, fly down, just kind of see how they were doing. Ken talked about how they would send down cassette tapes, asking him questions. They'd re-record them and send them back, or he would bring the Christmas cards to the family, so they wouldn't be postmarked, so they can possibly track them down. But for a lot of the family, they believed that either their brothers or cousins or uncles or whoever, from whatever part of the family you're from, either were dead or they weren't sure what happened. And so they sort of carried this question mark in their mind for all these years of really not knowing of whatever happened to them, or did they die, or are they okay? And he had to separate them, because one of the things we've talked about is how Whitey Bulger talked about to Mickey Cohen, go down to Brazil and never come back. And he also did another interview where he says essentially the same thing, where he said, if you're going to escape to another country, you are cutting off connections with that family forever. Because if you reach out to them, you're going to get caught, or the family's going to get in trouble because they know where you are and you're keeping that from the authorities. So he said, you basically have to fall off the earth. And Uncle Man had to be the keeper of that secret. He had to keep the two separated from each other where they can never connect directly again. And how difficult that must have been for him over the years of not being able to tell the family, like, look, I know exactly where they are. I've been with them multiple times. Here's some pictures. He couldn't do it, even though he probably wanted to. And finally, only at the very end of his life, just before he passed away, when he finally told the family the truth, just before it was gone forever. So he had to unburden himself at the very end.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, you think about, as like Mike said, they were very fearful, and even when they started writing the book, when all of the living brothers and sisters that were still alive, a group of them, decided to work with this author to write a book, The Riddle of the Rock. They thought, okay, well, it's been so many years, no one's really interested in following this story anymore. I mean, I'm sure some of them probably thought, don't worry about, giving any type of information. There's no one really kind of watching us anymore. No one's listening to our phone calls. And then we find out later that the author is actually working with the U.S. Marshals. So, even then, I could sure Uncle Man was probably, if he ever knew this, and I don't think he ever found out that author was working with Art Roderick at the time. So, that's just how they had to be very, very cautious. I mean, Uncle Man could have probably in that book, oh yeah, let me go ahead and tell them, okay, this is where they're at, and I know, where they're at, but he couldn't, and he didn't, and so, that was definitely a burden I'm sure he had to carry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a big secret. I mean, I don't know if I could keep a big secret like that.
That's a tough
That's a
secret.
big secret.
I'm not sure I could keep one that big either.
I don't know. I mean, that's a lot of pressure, especially with was his mom still alive at that time?
No.
Okay.
My grandmother died in 73 and my grandfather died in 89. And I believe they started writing that book either like 91, 92. It was somewhere in that time frame.
What
About
did
the same time frame that Fred Breezy came into the scene.
What did your Uncle Man, what did he do for a living?
He was a construction worker. He drove heavy equipment up until the time he retired. He was, he was a laborer. Most of the other family members, after they kind of got out of farming, they pretty much did small time jobs, nothing major. Because none of them that I know of ever graduated from high school. So, to my knowledge, none of them went into any type of corporate type environment. So,
yeah. What is what was your relationship with your Uncle Man? Did you have a?
Very good, very good. I remember as a kid, we would go down to visit my grandparents, and we would get there late on a Friday night. Next morning, he lived. My grandfather had divided up the farm at that time, and there were 4 children that he allowed to build, or he gave them property, and they built homes. One of them was Uncle Man, just right beside him. And I would, as a little kid, I can remember running down to their house the very next Saturday morning, and seeing them, having breakfast with them. Uncle Man was always around. I mean, he was a really cool person to be around. And as I grew up, he would after he divorced his wife, they separated, and he would always come by the house at some point in time, visit my mom and dad, and he eventually moved out to Texas. We always suspected he moved out to Texas to keep in contact with, I always thought, and my mom always thought, to keep in contact with brothers, that they would come up to the Mexican border and he would meet them. At least that's what we thought.
What part of Texas?
We could never, down El Paso, down near the border.
That's the border.
Yeah. And he even told my mom one time, and I said, Mom, why didn't you go? He invited my mom and my dad to come fishing. He said, I want to introduce you to some of my friends. And he even told, and the reason why she thought that it might be them is because he said, hey, those paintings that John painted, why don't you bring them with you? I want to show them to my friends. And but they never did for whatever reason. So I was like, when she told me this, I was like, Mom, why didn't you go?
Well, maybe they were scared.
That might have been John and Clarence.
I know, but still, like the FBI might have still scared them,
Well, if you're on the Rio Grande, you could have been right on the border.
But think about it. Like if the FBI had come to their house and, they might have still been afraid.
Of all of the sightings that are documented in the FBI, there is only really one that I wish that I could have unredacted, and read the full detail. The hotel is actually still there, but it's the hotel is called the Hawaiian. Oh, I'll have to look it up. Hawaiian Royal or something like that, and it's like a mile from the Mexican border. Well, there is an incident in the FBI report where the hotel owner at the time called them. There were 3 men who showed up at the hotel with 2 women. They all had 3 separate rooms. None of them ever left. They always ordered food in, and then one day they got up and left, didn't pay their bills, and that's when he calls the FBI. They come and show him pictures and signature cards, and it's all redacted what he says. So you can't tell what's being said.
Oh, come on.
And but it's only like a mile from the Mexican border.
But it's in the U.S.
Yeah, the hotel is in the U.S. Hotel is still there today.
Well, why would it be redacted?
Is that in El Paso?
It is. I'll pull it back up and I'll send you the location, and you can share it and look at it. And I'll even find the document in the FBI.
Please do, because I'm interested. I want to see that. That's interesting.
I always thought that was probably the most, the sighting that I could probably hang my hat on, because I could see them coming across that border to visit family members and then quickly going back across it. So, yeah.
Any other kind of sightings like that, or was that the main one?
There was a lot of other sightings, but none that I really thought was very valid. So John is working as a bail clerk or bellhop in some hotel in California, New York. I mean,
Now, we also talked about when their mother died, how there were the 2 women, quote unquote, women or men dressed as women, sort of back in the shadows in the trees, there but not there. And then, of course, Ken talked about when they all came back to the house after the funeral, the roses were on the table that had mysteriously arrived with no card. So that is another. Then that's a family sighting. That's not a FBI sighting.
And I never really. There were times I didn't really kind of believe that ever happened. I was there at my grandmother's funeral. I was maybe 11, 8, maybe 12. I don't remember ever seeing anybody that stood out to me as like a man dressed as a woman. But I will say that when I started looking at the inventory list of the photos that were in that pouch, the very last one describes a woman standing in front of a car, and then on the back of it says, "This is Alfred." So clearly they dressed as women in the past for whatever reason. At least Alfred did. And we do know that Clarence, according to my cousin, was dressed in a dress that he had taken off of a clothesline when he comes running and jumping in the back of my aunt's car when he was on the run. So he clearly put on some women's clothes at that point in time.
It was part of their toolkit.
That's so funny.
It very well. I mean, I could actually now believe that could have happened. That it really could have happened that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a simple little disguise that kind of can change the dynamic of what they look like. I'm a big fan. I'm like that
He
movie.
loves disguises.
I love this guy. I like that series, The
Americans.
Yeah.
And like when
Spies.
Philip always had, he was
Disguises.
like, they all had disguises. I think it's just brilliant. Just little.
I love this story that you guys have written so much. And I think like all these other little nuggets that you're giving us are just awesome. I want to see that redacted file.
I do too. I might actually ask to see if they'll give it to me.
Yeah.
I've never asked for it, but I could ask.
Maybe Stewart might have a little bit of pull. Maybe he can get the unredacted file.
You never know.
I actually asked him if he could help me get it, and he said he couldn't. But
Yeah.
maybe we'll ask him off.
We have someone else we can ask too.
Excuse me. Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, it's like we brought up, and even Stewart said, it's like there is no reason to keep this information redacted, secret after over 60 years. The people involved, they're all gone. There's nothing. There's no person to embarrass or to implicate in something that's still alive. Because in the United States, isn't it 50 years? After 50 years, sealed records are now public domain, basically.
I don't know about that. I mean, I know copyright, it's usually 50 years. I don't know about intelligence records. But my feeling is that there's some there that are unredacted. I think they lost some of them, and they don't want to admit that they lost them. I think that could be possible, because then that just makes them look even more.
Yeah, but there's so much controversy about this case. It would be hard for them to admit that they made a mistake, or that they knew and they didn't tell anyone. They might have known the whole time that you're right. They just don't want to admit it.
Although there was another interesting thing I just remembered that Stewart brought up that, again, I had never considered, was that there was a guard on the take, somehow being paid off to help the escapees in some way, that was a possibility of getting things in and out of the prison or looking the other way at key moments, kind of a thing. And I thought that was an interesting comment he made.
I've done a lot of prison documentaries, and I've, correctional officers. I know a lot about prisons, even to this day. If you have money, you can get things, and you're on the inside, and you have influence on the inside, you can flip a correctional officer. It happens all the time. So I'm sure that back then, where it was, they didn't have the level of cameras and stuff like that we have today. I'm sure there was, and the level of influence that you have 3 major gangsters in Alcatraz, with Mickey Cohen, Whitey Bulger, and Bumpy Johnson. I'm sure there were some correctional officer guards that were on the take that got goods, services, whatever they needed inside.
Now, there's one document we did uncover, and that was Charles Herman. He was the guard that
Herman the German.
Herman the German. You never forget that name. He was the guard that was on patrol that night, going up and down, the different, avenues in the prison. And he didn't do his bed check at around midnight that night because he was running behind and he had to clock out. So he just signed it off, but he didn't do it. And we have the letter where he's reprimanded by Warden Blackwell, talking about that, he bore the full responsibility of the escape, which is corroborated by Whitey Bulger in the letter, that how they were really riding him after the escape, that it was all his fault and that he didn't take the proper, procedures to heart that night. And he was really felt bad about it. He really, he felt the burden of that mistake himself. But he was the only one that was ever reprimanded officially by Warden Blackwell. It was 30 days without pay, and then he went back to duty after that. No other guard was ever charged or investigated in the escape plot, which I found curious, that he was the easy one to blame because it was happened on his watch. Sure. But how is it that for 6 months everyone missed everything? No guard ever found anything that we know of. There's no document we've ever found that said that they heard something or saw something, and or it was somehow swept under the rug, kind of a thing. So in my mind, the reason that they did that is, if you blame one, well, the easy one, if you blame somebody else, then they're all culpable, because they were all on duty at various times. They missed it. So the whole administration and prison guards there were all equally responsible, but they're not going to admit that. So they just blame one guy and say, it's your fault this happened.
Fall guy. They always have to have a fall guy. This way it kind of absolves everybody else.
No,
I'd like to know what happened to Herman the German after that. I'd love to.
He lasted until 1963, and then the prison closed, and then he and his wife moved to, I think, Arizona or New Mexico. He in Whitey Bulger's letter, he seemed to want to have a career long term as a guard. He wanted to move up the ranks, and one of the things they were kind of getting him on was that dream is gone. You're never going to move up after this, because you're going to be blamed.
A tainted record.
Right. And so he didn't, he finished his time there, and then he and his wife left.
Poor Herman the German.
Yeah. Although he donated his hat and his watch to the archives in at the Presidio in San Francisco. He left a couple of things behind, which you can go see if you want to check it out.
That's crazy. I can't wait to go back to Alcatraz now.
I know, now that your book is there at Alcatraz. Is it now you can buy your book at Alcatraz?
Well, we're going to get in there. They finally signed off on the book, and actually Ken sent me an email saying, are they going to tell us when they're going to put it, have it available? And I had gotten an email from the contact person I've been working with, and she said that their buyer is on vacation and won't be back till next week. So she'll talk to him when he gets back about buying the book. So it'll be soon.
Good.
Well, maybe once they carry it, and if they want to have a book signing, and I come back out, maybe that would be a perfect time for us to go to the FBI field office there and actually see if we can get someone to at least acknowledge the fact that I've been trying to have someone talk to me about the evidence.
And you know what? The good thing to do is we'll just bring cameras.
Yes, most definitely.
Because
Maybe we can get Stewart to go with us.
Hey.
Exactly.
Maybe he can flash his badge, and then maybe we can get Art to go with us.
Exactly.
He can flash his badge.
It'll be gotcha journalism.
Exactly. That's I love that idea. All right, guys. Well, listen. Thanks for taking the time today, and appreciate it. And how the book's doing? Have you gotten any updates on how the book's doing?
We don't have any hard numbers, but Amazon numbers look pretty good, so
Okay,
I'm
cool.
happy about that.
That's good.
Wonderful.
Fantastic.
The only other thing I'd like to, say to people that are watching this podcast is that, I can't wait for this podcast to show up in Brazil. When we show up in Brazil and we can have, another square box with someone in there, I'm really hoping it's going to be one of my relatives.
Exactly.
And at that point in time, everyone's going to want to watch this podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Very good.